All right, I will say good morning, a good tavach. It is a incredible schos Baruch Hashem to be able to begin a new week of learning together. We begin by thanking our sponsors, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Menachem Av, the Tilson and Wall families from Eretz Yisrael for dedicating all the Shum and Drushos this month, sending their love from Eretz Yisrael and inviting us, Eretz Hashem, to come and join them b'sha'at tova u'mitzlachas. Our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Dr. Mark and Mrs. Elsa Lustman, in commemoration of the 10th yahrzeit of Dr. Lustman's mother, Anne Lustman Chana Rachel Bas Avram Alter Zichrono Livracha, as well as in the schos of the safe return of our hostages, the success and hatzlacha of our precious soldiers, and I'm wishing Mazel Tov to Avram and Zizi Silber on the birth of a baby boy, Baruch Hashem, this past Erev Shabbos. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah, and Halavai, Meretz Hashem, safety, success, and hatzlacha for all of Klal Yisrael. The pastries and tikkun this morning were also dedicated by the Lustman Mishpacha in commemoration of the yahrzeit. We thank the Lustmans for the beautiful spread, for the beautiful l'chaim. Meretz Hashem Neshama Shav and Aliyah. And I will say, of course, we dedicate our learning this morning to all of our precious fallen soldiers, to Sergeant Daniel Perchuk, to Sergeant Nitai Metodi, to Sergeant Yaniv Itzak Oren, to Sergeant Ori Ashkenazi Nechemia, and to one of the tzanchim, to our paratrooper Amit Tzadikov. All precious karbonos on the mizbeach of Mesiras Nefesh for Klal Yisrael. May their neshamas have an aliyah. May their families have a nechama. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu see that we have sacrificed enough over the years for the safety and security of Am Yisrael. May it be a week of Emeretz Hashem Besoros Tovos, Shalom and success for all of Klal Yisrael. Well, with that, let us begin. So first of all, Mazel Tov on finishing Cheskas Habatim, and what a daf it was yesterday. Oh my gosh, what a daf. What a daf. Overwhelming. We had to go a little bit quickly, but Baruch Hashem, a lot that we covered, a lot we have to go back to. The good news is, Emeretz Hashem, 7.5 years we'll be back. It goes by very quickly. Emeretz Hashem, you could look at it before then also, but Emeretz Hashem will be back. All right, both say, so today we begin Emeretz Hashem, Hamol Cheres Habayis, the 4th parak of Bava Basra. With that, let us begin 61a, Daf Samech Aleph Amdalef. Nothing like, there's a certain excitement that comes with a new parak, a hischatshus, or a renewal. So let's dig into it. Hamocher Sabayis. Person sells a home. So again, I will say, so we're transitioning away from really the discussion regarding chazakah, right? So we kind of learned, we've exhausted it, and there's nothing left. There's mamish nothing. We've left no stone unturned when it comes to chazakah. So now we're coming actually to the interesting topic, the general topic of this parak. Although like any parak in Shas, there's like a lot thrown in, but we'll see the general topic is when you sell, in this case, real property, what's included in the sale of real property. That's really what we're trying to figure out over here. And I will say, I want to kind of give the disclaimer that like so many of these halachas, they are societally dependent, right? In other words, that these things are governed ultimately by what we call minhag hamakam. So again, obviously a lot of the things that we're going to see, you might scratch your head and say, well, that's not what we do. You're right, because it's a different minhag hamakam. There's a different marketplace, right, in 2024 than there was, again, in the Mishnah. So the Gemara says as follows. The Mishnah says, person sells a home. So I'm selling Ruvain a house. So the halacha is lo machar ha-yitzia. So the yitzia is not included in the sale of the home. And I will say, now interestingly enough, yitzia, the English translation that's often given for yitzia, is an annex, something added on. Now we're going to see there's a machlokes exactly what the definition of yitzia is. We'll see in just a little bit, but take a look at the Rashbam. Yitzia ve'ino bichlal bayis afa pi shepasuach hayitzia l'socho shal bayis di'ikah l'meimar t'cheivan d'tashmish shal bayis machram habayis afilu acheina machar. Now here's the point to remember in this. We're going to have machlokes what the actual definition of yitzia is, but the idea is that yitzia is open into the home. The home opens up into the yitzia. So I would have thought the havamina is because the home opens up into the yitzia is included in the sale. Kamash malan, it is not. So when you sell a house, yitzia is included. Now, of course, again, like any sale, can you include the yitzia in the sale? Can you include it? Yeah. Sure. What do you have to do? You have to specify. In other words, so an unspecified sale of a home, by definition, does not include yitzia. Next, even though the home opens up into the Yitzia. Nor does the sale of a home go ahead and open into the translation over here is a little bit misleading. Literally translated, the room that it opens up to. But in fact, again, interestingly enough, take a look at the Rashba. So we'll say, listen to this. The cheder shlefnim memeno refers to a storage area. Let's say again, now you have a storage area in the house, and the home opens up into the storage area. The storage area is not automatically included in the sale of the home. Now the chiddush we're going to see is even though all of these spaces are opened into from the home, so you could access the Yitzia from the home, you could access the storage area from the home, but when selling a house, when you sell someone a house, these areas are usually excluded from the sale unless specified otherwise. Incredible. Now this is fascinating. Now watch this and I remember again, one of the most fascinating distinctions between contemporary housing and Talmudic housing is, or was, the roof. Rooftops were often flat. There must have been some, roofs always have to have some level of pitch, right? Because otherwise, again, how are you draining water unless there's a central drain? But Bepashas, there was always some level of pitch. But again, I'm very into these inyanim now about pitches. I never thought I would be so interested in the pitch of a roof, but Baruch Hashem. Anyway, so Lamaisa, the Gemara, so the Mishnah says as follows. So when you have a rooftop, that was a usable space for activities of daily living. So this is fascinating. If I sell ruve in my home, if I have a rooftop that has a fence that is 10 tfachim. Now I will say, now what does that mean if you have a fence that's 10 tfachim? So remember again, the halacha is you have to put a fence around your rooftop. Now the truth is you're really only fencing in a rooftop that people are going up on, right? People are only going up on it if what? If it's a usable space for activities of daily living. So interestingly enough, if I have a house and that house has a rooftop and that rooftop has a fence of 10 tfachim or more, which means that is a usable space. That is a space that is almost considered separate and distinct from the rest of the house. And therefore, halacha l'maaseh, if I sell ruvein my home, my rooftop, provided that it has a fence that is above 10 tefachim, is not included in the sale. Fascinating. Rabbi Yehuda says, Im yesh lo tzuras hapesach, af al pi she'eno gava yu tefachim eino machar. Rabbi Yehuda says the truth is, even if it doesn't have a fence that's 10 tefachim, Rabbi Yehuda says, if it has its own doorway to access it, it is not considered to be part of the house. It is considered to be a separate domicile area. Now what's the pshat with that? So I guess what it's looking at is like this. There would normally be two ways to access your roof, right? One way would be like, let's say, a latch in the ceiling. Like in other words, you walk up where there's a ladder, there's something, the ceiling opens up, you walk up to the roof. So therefore the Mishnah says, okay, it's fine. But if the rooftop is a separate domicile area, i.e. it has a fence 10 tefachim high or more, not included in the sale of a home. So here comes along and says, if the rooftop is accessed by its own doorway, it has its own tzuras hapesach, that shows that it is its own choshev area. And in that case, even if it doesn't have a fence of 10 tefachim high, the existence of its own doorway gives it or endows it with its own independent domicile area. Beautiful. So the Mishnah tells us again, you sell stam a home. These are the areas that are excluded from the sale unless stipulated otherwise. So let's analyze. So my Yitzia. Okay, so obviously the first question is, what is Yitzia, right? So the Mishnah says that if you sold a home, the Yitzia is not included. Both say, you would think to yourself that why would the Mishnah use a term that is ambiguous? In other words, so obviously, when writing the Mishnah, the codifiers of the Mishnah felt that we would understand what Yitzia is. But why not use a more explicit term? So also there's a tremendous Musar Haskell in this. The way it works in Yiddishkeit is accept and do, and then question later. There's a beautiful element in our religion. Again, we are encouraged to question, we're encouraged to understand, but one of the most beautiful things is the ability to kind of dive in even before you know what's going on over here. So it's almost as if like the Mishnah teaches us this hashkafa by sometimes using words. So if somebody to ask you, by the way, if you sell a home, what's excluded from the sale? So you could say, because hopefully we were still paying attention for the first line of the Mishnah, right? So you could say, if somebody asks you, right, you sell a home, what's excluded? Oh, Yitzia. Yitzia is excluded, right? By the way, what's the Yitzia? And what's your answer going to be? I don't know. I don't know. And we'll say, you know what? There's a beauty in that ignorance. I know what the halacha is. The halacha is you sell a home, the Yitzia is excluded. What's Yitzia? I'm not sure yet, but I know that that's the truth. Regardless of what the definitional reality is, I know that that's the truth. And that as such, I think it's one of the most beautiful aspects of Yiddishkeit that sometimes as knowledge becomes more accessible to us, because we live in an age of just, I know it's an overused word of unprecedented access to Judaic knowledge, it's important that we not let the knowledge take over everything in our Yiddishkeit. There is a beauty to just pure, blind acceptance and just the buy-in. And that's why I think sometimes the Mishnah uses words that we're not going to understand at first glance to give us the opportunity to commit to something even before I understand it. So my Yitzia, okay, but now we still have to try to understand it. So my Yitzia, what is the Yitzia? So hachar targimu afta. So we'll say first definition is afta. Now what's afta? Rashi says over here, binyan namoch eitzel habayis mitzido me'achorav. So we'll say, so interestingly enough, it is an area that has a lower roof. Now what we're going to see is the Yitzia was an area that was used for activities of daily living, right? So in other words, it was a house domicile-like area. The first opinion says it was just a lower roof. So because it was dramatically different than the rest of the living space, even though it is also a living space, therefore halacha l'maisa, again, it wasn't included in the sale of a home. But it was, again, to be clear, as opposed to the cheder, as opposed to the storage area, so Yitzia is a living space. It's just different than the rest of the living space of the home, and therefore not automatically included in the sale of the home. So first opinion, after living space with a lower roof. Okay, Rabbi Yosef says, Bitka Chalila. He holds it's a Bitka Chalila. What's a Bitka Chalila? Look at the Rashbam. He says, Iu nami kimin after samuch labayis, ela sha'asoi chalonos lenoi. You know what it is? It's fascinating. A sunroom. A sunroom. This was a room that had windows on all sides. That was it. You would relax in there. You relax in there. So Rashbam says, it was made windows on all sides. A sunroom. A sunroom. So we'll say, so again, so just to understand, it's an area that I live in. In other words, it's activities of daily living, but it's a separate type of usage. Either, again, according to the Afta, it's a low roof. According to the Bitka Chalila, it's a sunroom. So in other words, I'm relaxing there. It's an area that's very beautiful. So it's not automatically included in the house. So according to the opinion that says that Yitzia is an Afta, and the Afta is not included in the sale, Kol Shekin Bitka Chalila lo mizdabna. Certainly, a sunroom is not included. Now, why? See, here's what's interesting. An Afta is pretty much a regular part of the house. Just the difference is the roof height is a little bit different. But in all other respects, it's a regular part of the house. As opposed to a sunroom, which wasn't really included to be like a regular part of the house. It was a part of, where you sat down and relaxed. It was almost more for the aesthetic quality than for the domicile quality. So the opinion that says that the afta is excluded would certainly say that the sunroom is excluded. But the opinion that says that Yitzia means a sunroom, the sunroom is excluded. Ava afta mizdabna. But an afta would be included, right? Why would the afta be included? Because essentially it's just like a regular part of the house, albeit with a little bit of a different roof height. Okay, so we'll say, so first part of our Gemara was the definition of a Yitzia, machlokes. Either again it's afta, domicile area, just the lower roof, or bitka chalila, a sunroom. Okay, Tana Rabbi Yosef, shalosh shemosh leisi Yitzia. So we'll say, so now, this is just an interesting idea the Gemara just wants to point out over here. Rabbi Yosef says that there are three words to describe a Yitzia. Three different words to describe Yitzia. Now we'll say, see, here's really, so what is the definition of Yitzia? So really Yitzia means a domicile area that is not like the rest of the primary domicile area. So it is still an area in which you use to live in. It's still an area that is used for activities of daily living, but Lamaisa, it is unlike the primary domicile area. So the Gemara just points out, Rabbi says there are three different names for Yitzia. What are they? Right? So the Gemara says, Shalosh so Yitzia, or I should say three different names for this type of area. A Yitzia, a Tzela, and a Ta. These are three different names. So the Gemara says, Dichsev, and I'll say, actually what's quite beautiful is all of these different names come from where? Come from the Beis HaMikdash. See, Rabbi says, we're going to see in just a little bit, we're not really going to delve too much into this, but the Lamaisa, the Beis HaMikdash had primary areas of usage and had secondary chamber-like areas of usage as well. Those secondary chambers, those secondary areas, those areas of secondary usage, right, were called either Yitzia, Tzela, or Ta. So Mar says, Dichsev, HaYitzia Tachtona Chamish Bama Rachba. So you see again, it's called a Tzela. So we'll say that's by the Beis HaMikdash. That's by the Beis HaMikdash. The first Beis HaMikdash. Next, Tzela, it's also called the Tzela, Dichsev, Vatzalos Tzela El Tzela Shalosh Ushloshim Pamim. Okay, so I'll say this is by Yecheskel. Now this is Yecheskel's vision of the third Beis HaMikdash. Third Beis HaMikdash. And Ta Dichsev Vata Kana Echad Orach V'Kana Echad Rachav Ubein HaToim Chamesh Amos V'Ibay Sema Mehacha Kosala Hechal Sheish V'Hata Sheish Kosala Ta Chamesh. Okay, so we'll say Rabbi Yossi just pointing out over here that first of all, it's important that this term that the Mishnah uses is not one that the Mishnah made up, but rather, again, this idea is actually a biblical term. And the biblical term, again, appears in three different variations, Yitzia, Tzela, and Ta, and all essentially mean the same thing, secondary areas that are immediately off primary usage areas. Okay, but again, I will say for our purposes, the idea over here is the Yitzia is, although it is a domicile area, because it's not a primary domicile area, therefore what? It is not automatically included in a sale of a home. In fact, just the opposite, it is automatically excluded from the sale of a primary home, unless, of course, otherwise articulated. Amar Marzutra says, Vuhu dohavi arba amos. So this is very interesting. This comes along Marzutra and he says as follows. When the Mishnah says that if you sell a home, the Yitzia is not included, that only assumes that what? Or that is only true if the Yitzia is at least Daled Amos, which makes the Yitzia, when we say Daled Amos, what we mean is Daled by Daled, right? A 4 Amma by 4 Amma area. If it is that, then that means it is significant on its own. And if it's significant on its own, it can be excluded from the primary sale. If, however, the space itself is less than Daled Amos, then what? Then it's really batal to the primary domicile and will be included in the sale. So the Gemara said, Ravina said, one second. Ravina said to Razutra, L'didachta amit adahavi arba amos. So according to you, says that ultimately, again, it's only excluded from the sale if it has at least an area of Daled Amos, elami ata gabi bar. What about the following case? So we'll say, so just understand the progression over here. The Mishnah says, I sell a home to Ruvain and I have a Yitzia. Let's just call it a sunroom, right? I have a sunroom. So what's the halacha? My sunroom is not included in the sale of the home. Marzucha comes along and says, but that's only if the sunroom is at least 4 ammas or larger, because then it's significant and therefore not included. Which means that if it's less than 4 ammas, therefore what? It is included. So comes along Ravina says, one second, let's analyze this. Elami'ata gabe bar. So also we're going to come to this as well. What about a bar? When it comes to a pit. This nan, v'lo asa bar, v'lo asa dus. Afapi shekasav lo umka veruma. Supposed to now listen to this. Let's say I'm selling a home to Ruvain and I'm selling a home in a chatzar. And the halacha is, if I have a bar, I have a pit, right, or a water cistern, that is not included in the sale. It's not included in the sale of a home, right? When you sell a house, it doesn't include the bar. So the Gemara says, are we going to make the same distinction? Hachanami, ihavu arba amos in lo. So would we apply the same halacha that only if the bar is Daled Amos is it not included, but if it's less than Daled Amos, it is included. Now the Gemara doesn't articulate this fully, but the Rashbam explains this. Here's the problem: a bar is never Daled by Daled. It's never that big. It's never that big. So if that's the case, if you're going to apply that metric, that should mean that what? That a bar is always included in the sale of a home. But yet we know that a bar is not included in the sale of the home. And therefore, again, this is Ravina's Kasha on Marzutra, to which the Gemara says apples and oranges. The comparison is not good. Hachi hashta, hasam hatashmishta l'chod, v'hatashmishta l'chod. There's a different reason. Do you know why the bar is not included in the sale of the home? Because a bar is a totally separate usage than a bias. They're two separate things. So that's why when you buy a home, you don't automatically get the bar. The usages are fundamentally separate. So again, you could buy the bar with the home, but a sale of a home doesn't automatically include the bar. This one has this usage, this one has that usage, and therefore one sale should not cover two. However, in this case over here, the bias and the yitzia have the same usage. This is what we were talking about before, right? A yitzia is a domicile area. It's just not a primary domicile area. So over here, the bias and the yitzia have the same usage. Therefore, ihavi daled amos chashiv. So if the yitzia is daled amos, right, daled by daled, then it has its own identity. Because it has its own identity, it's not included in the sale of the home. Ve'ilo lo chashiv. But if it doesn't have an area of daled amos, then what? Then by definition, it's just subsumed by the bias itself. And I will say, the halacha l'may said that we accept that distinction. So bottom line, what comes out of this first part of the Gemara? If I sell Reuben a home and I have a yitzia, I have a sunroom, the sunroom or what we would call the afta, or this other domicile area with a lower roof, that area is not included in the sale. It has its own identity, therefore not included in the sale of the bias. But that is only true. When does it have its own identity? Only if what? If it has an area of dalid by dalid, dalid amas by dalid amas, that's when it has its own identity. If it's less than dalid by dalid, it's so small that by definition it is included in the scope of the house and therefore included in the sale. Beautiful. Next, what was the next thing in the Mishnah? A storage area. If I have a storage area, right now, again, I will say the chap over here is, it's not talking about like you have like a pod in your backyard, right? That's even easier to understand. This is talking about I have a storage area that my house opens into, right? This is a little storage shed that's next to not next, opens into my house, right? Halacha, so the storage unit is not included in the sale. Says the Gemara, Hashta yitzia lo mizdab ben cheder miboy. So that's obvious. If my sunroom, which is an actual domicile area, albeit a secondary domicile area, is not included in the sale of my home. So of course the storage area is not included. I was going to say a storage area, as important as it is not a domicile area. So again, you hear this? If the yitzia, which is a domicile area, albeit the secondary one is not included in the sale, then it goes without saying that the storage area certainly is not included as well. To which they as well say, Amud Beis, lo tzricha da'afagav de'meitzar le'mitzri avrei. Okay, so we'll say, this is now going to open the door to a really fascinating discussion. What's the case, we'll say? The case over here is where I sell Ruvain, my house. And what do I do in the sale of the house? I go ahead and I even give him the boundaries of the sale. I give him the boundaries of the sale. The meitzar le meitzar me'avrai means I give him the outer boundaries. Look at the Rashban for just a moment. Lo tzricha, the Rashban says, lemisni lo machar es hacheder ela the meitzar lo mocher lo lokeach b'shtar mechira mitzarim chitzonim shechutz lecheder. So I will say, now watch this. Imagine for a moment when I sell Reuven this property, I say, Reuven, I'm selling you my home. Now the wording over here is very important. I tell him, I'm selling you my bias. And then what do? I outline the boundaries of the bias. Now, interestingly enough, according to the boundaries that I outlined for him, what's included in those boundaries? What's included in the boundaries? The storehouse. The storehouse. So now watch this. So the Rashi, so I might have thought, well, look, I outlined the boundaries, and the storehouse is within the boundaries. So what does that show? I'm certainly selling him the storehouse. So we'll say, let me, let me do this. So this concept of mitzarim hirchavlo means I extended the boundaries. Sometimes, again, I will say, this is all dependent ultimately, again, on minhag hamakam. But it appears in times of the Gemara, you would sell someone a property. So if I tell you I'm selling you my house, so the problem just is, Reuven may not understand, just like area-wise, what is that? So what would be common is I would outline the boundaries from the northeast corner over here to the southwest corner over here, and it was common to go ahead and outline a much bigger footprint. Not because all those items are included in the sale, but because I'm trying to show Ruvain where the property that I'm selling is situated, right? If I'm too small, too specific, Ruvain might not chap it. So this concept of the Meitzar le Mitzari Avroi, I would show him the outer boundaries in order to give him the full grasp of where the house was that he was buying. So I'll say, now watch this. So what's the case over here? I'm selling Ruvain my home, and in order to show him what he's buying, I give him the quote-unquote outer boundaries. What do the outer boundaries include? What do they include? Storehouse. So you might have thought that because I'm outlining the outer boundaries, therefore I'm including the storehouse. Kamash Malam, no. The storehouse is not included. But you're giving him the outer boundaries. That's a maramokum. I'm just trying to help him get his bearings to understand where his bias that he's buying from me is situated, but not to mean to include everything in those boundaries. So again, this is a perfect example today. This is a perfect example of minagamakom. This is what was done. To us, it sounds a little bit strange. You outline boundaries. So I would think if you outline boundaries, everything in the outlined boundaries included in the sale. Okay, because that's maybe how we operate contemporarily. But Bismana Gemara, this was a common practice to what we call Meitzar le Mitzar Avroi, outline the outer boundaries to give the purchaser an understanding of the area in which his purchase is situated, but not to include all of the items included in those outlined boundaries. Even though in this case the storehouse is included in the outlined boundaries, the storehouse is not included in the sale because the storehouse is considered to be its own separate area. So we'll say this is the position of Nachman. Nachman says, name of Rabbi Baravua, here we go. This is a very interesting case. I own an apartment building. Right? I own an apartment building. So I'll say, so now what happens? I'm selling Ruvain an apartment in the building. So I own the building. I'm selling him an apartment in the building. So I'm selling him an apartment within a much bigger building. So watch this. So I sell Ruvain, and I tell Ruvain where is his apartment located, and I give him the boundaries of the building. So the Gemara says, in that case, even though I've given him the boundaries of the building, I've only sold him the apartment, right? I have not sold him the building. So if I haven't sold the building, so why am I outlining the boundaries? Again, to give him an understanding as to where his unit is situated. So Gemara says, 1 second, I don't understand this case. Hey Chidami, what's the case? So I'll say, if people call an apartment a bias and a building a bira, and I tell Ruvain that I'm selling him a bias, not a bira, so then it makes more perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. However, Ella de la bira nami karle bias, maybe the case over here is, but if we're talking about a case where even an apartment building is called a bira, then Abba say, then what? Maybe I sold Ruvain the building. Now, of course, there's another piece in this also, which is the purchase price should also be somewhat reflective of what it is that's being purchased, but we'll come back to that at a different time. So rather the Gemara says, but if a bira is called a bias, then maybe I sold Ruvain the building. So which the Gemara says, lo tzricha, the ruba karle la bias or the bira. The majority of people call an apartment a bias and a building a bira. The ikanami de la bira karile bias. And ultimately, again, but there are those who also call a bira a bias. So this is what's interesting. So normally people call an apartment a bias and a building a bira. But there are some people who also call a building a bias. So now watch this. I sell Ruvain a bias. Here's the case, right? So I own the apartment building. I'm selling Ruvain an apartment. I say, Ruvain, I'm selling you a bias, and then what do? I outline the boundaries. What boundaries do I outline? Right? The building boundaries. So now what's the shaila? What did I sell Ruvain? And now the problem just is there are some people who also call a building a bias. So Mate, what would you have thought? Kule zabinle. I would have thought that, listen, take these two things combined, right? Number one, that sometimes the building is called a bias. Number two, I outlined the boundary. I outlined the boundaries. I'm going to thought that therefore I'm selling Ruvain, the building. Kamash malan midahavile lemichtav velo shayarta bizvini alin klum velo kasuv. So we'll say, so Rav Nachman says like this. Okay, so there's a lot happening over here. So we'll say, Rav Nachman says, Rav Nachman has two corollary principles. Principle number one is as follows, that it is common when selling property to outline the outer boundaries to give the buyer an idea as to where the property is located, but the outer boundaries are not meant to actually demarcate the specific boundaries of the sale. Now, let's say, once you accept that principle, Rav Nachman has another piece. So what do you do? What do you do if you want to sell someone all of the property outlining the boundaries? Then how do you do it? Because let's have a case like that. I want to say everything. So then you need another phrase. What's the phrase? Here are the boundaries of what I'm selling you, and I am not withholding anything for myself. Right? Velo shayarta bizvini alin. I have not withheld anything for myself. So if you say that magic phrase, right, that means you're selling everything. You're selling everything. So I'll say, so therefore, again, plug this back into this case, right? So I'm selling Ruvain. Now, by the way, the Rashbam adds in one more important detail on this, which is Ruvain and I are standing in the apartment that I'm selling him, right? So I'm selling him. I own the building. I'm selling him an apartment. I tell him, Ruvain, I'm selling you the bias. Now we're living in a place where people call an apartment a bias, and some people call the building a bias, right? I outline the borders, the surrounding area, and the surrounding area is the building in its entirety. But what happens? I tell them, I'm selling you this bias, but I don't say the phrase, and I'm not holding back anything. So by definition, Rav Nachman says the exterior boundaries are just meant to kind of be a maramakum, to show him where the property is situated, but all I'm selling him is the apartment and not the building. Okay, Shmamina Shiri Shire. So I'll say, so what do you see from here? So again, I'll say, if I don't make that statement, Velo Shiyarta Bizvini Alin Klum, I have not withheld anything for myself, then that by definition means I am withholding something for myself. And therefore, again, the exterior property demarcations are only to give him an idea as to where the property is situated, but not to sell him the building. Okay, incredible. But Rav Nachman, so we'll say another case, a similar case. I'm selling now, in this case, we'll say I own a whole bunch of fields, right? We have a whole open valley area, a plain, and I own a whole bunch of fields in the plain. And I'm selling Ruvain one field in the plain. So I say, now what do I do? So I'm selling Ruvain one field, but I own 10 fields in the area. Now what do I do? When showing Ruvain, Ruvain, you bought the field, and I want to outline for him where he bought his field, I give him the borders of all 10 fields. So even though I'm giving him the exterior borders of the 10 fields, I'm only selling him one. Right now, I say, so I'm giving him the border of all 10 fields. Why? To show him the area in which his field that he is buying is situated. So the Gemara says, well, again, hey chidami, what's the case? Ilema, the karelela sadila bika. So if people call a field, and a plain, so a plain represents an area of multiple fields. So I'm selling Ruvain a sada. So if sada means one field, and bika means multiple fields, then pshita sada zabin lay, bika lo zabin lay. So if sada means one field, and bika means multiple fields in a plain, if I tell Ruvain I'm selling him a sada means what? Sada means what? One field. So what's the shayla? So I'll say, so maybe the case is where people also call a plain, comprised of multiple fields, called it also a sada. If that's the case, kula zabile. Ultimately, again, then maybe I'm selling Ruvain everything. To which the Gemara says, lo svicha diika de la sada karle sada ulabika bika v'ikanami de la bika karle sada. So it's the same as we saw before. So what's the case? In general, people call one field a sada, and they call a plain, right? Multiple fields a bika. But there are some people who also call a plain, right? A plain of multiple fields a sada. All right, so now what's the problem over here? So now let's put this case together. I own the bika, I own the plain, 10 fields. I'm just calling it 10, it could be 20 fields, it doesn't matter how many. 10 fields. I'm selling Ruvain a sada, 1 field. So then I tell him I'm selling him a field. The problem is, some people call a plain a sada also. To compound the problem, what's happening over here? When I demarcate the area of the field that I'm selling, which boundaries do I give him? The outer boundaries of all 10 fields. So what would you have thought? I might have thought that maybe I'm selling Ruvain everything, the entire plain, all of the fields. Kamash malan midahabele lemichtav le lo shiyarta bizvini alin kadmi klum velo kasilbe. No, because if I was selling him everything, then what? I would have to make the statement, Ruvain, I'm selling you my property, and I'm not withholding anything for myself. You need that statement. The fact that I did not make that statement indicates that what? I am holding something back. What am I holding something back? What am I holding back? The other 9 fields. So why did I give Ruvain the outer boundaries as the area for the sale? Why did I do that? To show him the general area in which his field that he is buying is situated. So the Gemara says, so we'll say, so this is the position of Rav Nachman, right? And Rav Nachman really comes out ultimately again with 2 concepts. Number one, it is common when selling real property to give people an enlarged boundary. That boundary is not representative of the actual boundary of what it is that they're buying. So what does that boundary represent? What does it represent? The area in which they are buying property. The area in which they're buying property, but not to be boundary specific for their particular purchase. Now, because of that, what do you do if you are selling someone the entire area in the demarcated boundary? What do you do? You say the magic words. What are the magic words? I am not withholding anything in this sale for myself. That's it, then you sell them everything. Which also tells us that if you don't say those words, the automatic default assumption is that what? You are withholding something for yourself. Okay, so therefore we'll say this is Rav Nachman's statement. Now the Gemara asks the obvious question. The Gemara says, now here's the question. We just illustrated the same principle in 2 cases, right? Case one was with the apartment building, and case number 2 was the sale. It's the same case. It's the same case. So in general, examples are always great. But why do you need to illustrate the same concept using 2 cases? We already know it. So the says, so obviously the redundancy is necessary. If we would have just said the apartment case, then what? So we'll say it's different. The apartment case, we'll say, is a different kind of case. Why? Because the apartment itself has one usage, and the building has a separate usage. But by the bika, by the plain, where again it's all fields, one usage. Maybe when I outline the outer borders, maybe I really am selling everything. In other words, that in the case of the fields, really they're all like items. Exactly the same items, right? So therefore, again, I might have thought that when I'm outlining the outer boundaries, and again, especially sometimes if also people call a bika a sada, they do call a plain a field, maybe I'm selling him everything. In the case of the apartment building, again, a building is a different usage than the individual apartment. Maybe that's not included. Therefore, again, I need both those cases. V'yashrin a bika, and if it would have just said the plain case, mishum delo havilei lameitzarlei. So I'll say, because ultimately, again, in the plain case, there was no need to give those outer boundaries. But in the house case, ultimately, again, where he should have given more specific boundaries, and he didn't do so, maybe he went ahead, ultimately, again, maybe we went ahead and they sold them everything. And I was about to say, the idea here is that in the field case, if you look at the Rashbam says, alright, so let's say, so therefore again, the Gemara says, but in the apartment building case, since ultimately again, there needed to be a more specific Meiser, and you didn't do so. So perhaps you sold them the entire thing. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, both cases are needed. So the idea, like we often answer in these kind of cases, is the cases are dissimilar enough that one could not necessarily have intuited one from the other, and therefore you need both. Okay, incredible. Both says go a little bit weiter. Finish up the end of the daf. Kiman az lahad amar Rav Mari. So we'll say, so again, this idea ultimately of Rav Nachman. So two ideas, two sister corollaries. Number one is that it is common to outline exterior boundaries to give a point of reference for where this sold item is located, but it does not mean to create the actual boundaries of the sale. And therefore the corollary to that is, if you want to sell everything in the aforementioned articulated boundaries, you have to make the statement, I am not retaining anything for myself. But if you don't make that statement, the automatic assumption is, I am retaining something for myself. Now, I will say, just to kind of plug this back so you keep the train of thought, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Because remember, what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said that if I sell my home, what's not included in the sale? What's not included in the sale? The storeroom, right? What the Gemara called the cheder, the storeroom. Now, the Gemara said, that's obvious that the storeroom is not included, right? In other words, remember again, if the yitzia, right, the sunroom or the after room, which is an actual living space, if that's not included, then alachas kama v'kama, the storeroom is not included. To which the Gemara says, no, what's the case? I sold Ruvain the house. I outlined the boundaries of the house. The storeroom was included in the boundaries. So you might have thought that because I outlined the boundaries, therefore the storeroom is included. Kamash Malan, we pass on like Rav Nachman, and Rav Nachman holds that external demarcated boundaries are not meant to highlight the actual area of sale, rather they're meant to give a point of reference for the item that is being sold. That's the whole progression over here. So let's finish up. Kiman azlahad amra mari braid Rabbi Shmuel bar shilas mishmei dabaye. So we'll say, whose opinion is reflected in the following statement of Rav Mari, who made it in the name of Rabbi. If I sell something to my friend, I sell something to Ruvain, that you have to say, I have not gone ahead. I have not gone ahead and withheld anything in this for myself. Right, in accordance with whose opinion do you have to make that actual statement? Right, according to whose opinion do you have to make that actual statement? Kiman, ki Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba Baravua. Ultimately, again, like Rav Nachman, in the name of Rabba Baravua. So we'll say, so again, now remember, under normal circumstances, lav dafka, you have to say that in property, if you're going, in other words, if you're going to go ahead and use the concept of outlining exterior borders in order to give a point of reference, right? Then halacha and right. So the assumption is you're not selling everything in those borders. If you want to sell everything in those borders, you have to make the statement, I am not withholding anything for myself in this sale. Whose opinion does that reflect? Ultimately, again, the statement of Rav Nachman. I will say, let's stop over here for today. Shkoyach, everyone. Wow, what a start to the new parak. Shorter daf tomorrow, Mirza Hashem. Shkoyach, everyone. What a start to the week. Hatzlacha. All right, Charazim, have a wonderful day, everyone. Modern Hebrew is fear, in Tira is positive. Right.